session, we are honored to showcase a multi-awarded influencer, Chief Executive Officer of the company EdTech, author and inspirational speaker with more than 30 years of experience in educational technology and digital safeguarding, Mr. Al Kingsley from the United Kingdom. His session title is Shaping and Implementing Your Digital Strategy. Hello, Al, how are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just quickly share my screen with you. I'd love to say it's a lovely sunny morning in the UK, but it's actually the middle of the night, or it's 6:30 in the morning, so it's still very dark outside. Hopefully.
We are tuning in from all over the world for you, Al.
Well, let's hope it was worth listening in. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Al Kingsley. I wear a number of hats. So, as you alluded to, I'm Group CEO of NetSport, an EdTech company for the last 30 years. But I'm also chair of a multi-academy trust, a cluster of schools in the east of the United Kingdom. I also chair an alternative provision academy, so an education setting for young people that struggle in mainstream education. And I also lead our SEND, Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Group for the East of England. So I wear a number of hats in education. And I guess one of the things that I'm passionate about and often write about and talk about is the role of technology in supporting the way that we deliver our teaching and learning. And not least, given the challenges we've had over the last number of years, we've seen technology move to the fore. Now, it's not always a race of who's got the most technology. So what I wanted to share with you today was a bit of a summary about how we can look and consider our digital strategy, how technology can play a role within our schools, and take the next steps in terms of how we actually turn that idea and vision into a reality within our school settings. So here's me, Al Kingsley. I've shared my Twitter handle. I love to share and talk about all things education and technology. So please do connect and feel free to reach out after this session if you want to talk about any activities. But we will dive straight into our session. So digital, what is it? Well, it's the combination of that challenge between what is possible versus probably the most important thing, which is actually identifying what you need. And you might notice through my presentation a few musical references as we go along. So as the Beatles said, sometimes your digital strategy can feel a little bit like a long and winding road. I'm going to hopefully show you a few shortcuts as we carry on our journey. So big question to start the conversation off. What does a digital strategy mean to you? When I'm doing inset with schools, districts in the US, or working in other international settings, I often start the conversation with simply that question. What does a digital strategy mean to you? And not surprisingly, we get a really mixed set of reviews. And here's a few of the kind of key words that have been collected during presentations that I've delivered. And perhaps you'll not be surprised to hear there's that mixture. There's half the audience that think this is innovating, this is exciting, this creates opportunities for us to unleash technology in our schools. But there's also just as many staff who fear it might be somewhat daunting and confusing and concerned about how they're going to either develop the confidence with those skills, or more importantly, for most educators, how are we going to find the time? So one of the biggest strengths, I would say, within the education community is our ability to be reflective, look at things and reflect how they work. So I always say, as a starting point, sometimes you have to look back in order to move forward. But of course, as Oasis said, make sure you don't look back in anger. Let's do it in a positive way. So why do we need to do that? Well, in essence, I would argue solutions are rarely effective if all you intend to do is simply add to what you have. Why would you just simply add until you know the benefits and the impact? So our starting point is, what have we already got when it comes to technology and digital within our schools? What aspects of it have worked well for us so far? Do we know what's been effective in terms of becoming sustained and embedded within our schools and our classroom practice? Do we know where our collective digital skills are within our school? Who are the go-to staff for different solutions where we want to have extra advice and support? Do we know that our technology is being used on a regular basis and effectively? So one of the things I always say is start with getting a grip. Ask some key questions, or as Whitney Houston will say, how will I know? What have we got? How many devices have we got? Where are they? How regularly are they used within teaching and learning? What software do we use versus what do we subscribe to? Do we know that the software and the apps that we currently pay and subscribe for are being used regularly within our teaching and learning environment? What about our infrastructure? Does it have the capacity and the capability for us to simply add more? And ironically, often when schools start looking at a budget to perhaps add tablets into a classroom or Chromebooks into a teaching space, we often forget the ancillary cost of upgrading our Wi-Fi or our network infrastructure or our storage capacity. So getting that breadth of conversation and understanding what's working well is key. I'd also ask, if you get to the point where you're looking to purchase additional technology within your school, you're in a much stronger position to justify the acquisition if you can evidence that the technology you've already got is delivering and working well for you. So understanding that is really key. Now, there's another strand in education that will be no surprise to all of you on this call, which is that concept of co-production. The more voices we get around the table, the better insights we've got, the easier it is for us to make the right decisions. And the same applies when it comes to our digital. So perhaps the best example is my Venn diagram here, or as Vanilla Ice would say, we need to stop, collaborate, and listen. So how do we shape that digital vision, that strategy for what we want to do in our schools? Well, the best way is to start by asking the most important voices. So top of the list, our teachers and students, getting their feedback and impact in terms of where technology can have a positive impact on teaching and learning. Perhaps we're thinking about the way that it might engage our disengaged learners, the way that it might stimulate different ways to deliver enrichment and experiences as part of our teaching journey. And of course, when they come to those pressures right now, also looking at ways that technology can help us free up time, that valuable commodity in our schools. Now that time may be automating some things. It may be closing down the feedback loop duration, giving quick feedback to our students, and much more. Now you'll see on my Venn diagram, I've got some other little bubbles that feed into that. So the first one is our senior leadership and our school development plan. It's not unreasonable that when we're looking at how digital is going to be woven into our strategy, that one of the priorities might be to align with those key strands in our school development plan. Strategically, where are the areas of development in our school and how can digital help on any of those key points? Next up is making sure that our network manager, our IT team are part of the conversation, not to run the conversation, but to be aware of the things we're considering and be able to voice where there are potential limitations or where we may need investment in order to deliver. Next, we've got data privacy, really hot topic. The more we use technology in the schools, the more we have to be mindful of data privacy, whether we're thinking about the technology we use and that it may contain our student data, where that data is held, how long it's held for, who has access to it. But of course, we'll be thinking in the bigger picture about our students' data privacy when they're online and acting and utilizing digital technology. Then we've got our special educational needs and disabilities. If we're adding technology, we want to be leveling up and closing that gap. So we want to, where possible, look at technology that will be accessible for all of our learners and will actually bridge that gap. The next bubble, UK term DSL, designated safeguarding lead, and the broader safeguarding topic. It's not a surprise that the more we expose our learners to the digital world, the digital community, we need to take appropriate measures in parallel to keep them safe online. Whether that's thinking about the way that we monitor their activity, give them the ability to report concerns, whether it's from access to harmful information, online bullying, whatever the topics may be, to make sure that they're part of that narrative. Then we have trustees and governance, that overarching role within our school structures around the world. Those key questions that we need to be asking. What are we proposing we plan to do? Why are we doing it? How are we going to measure impact? Those key questions that would sit alongside the decisions in the next bubble, which is finance. And again, we always talk about finance. And in many schools around the world, I often find that finance is the lead in a digital strategy. We've got X thousand dollars available to spend. What technology are we looking to implement? And it's the wrong way round. Finance should dictate the speed of the journey, not the destination. So we shape from a pedagogy and from a teaching and learning perspective what technology will have the impact, and finance will dictate how quickly we can reach those aspirations. And then last but not least, at the top, and in many ways it could be a circle around all of it, is our training and our continuous professional development. And often for schools, we adopt new technology and we haven't done this co-production. So for many staff, we don't really know why we've switched to a new system or we've added a new technology in our schools. And then more importantly, we expect after maybe an hour or two of professional development at the start of the academic year, that staff will have the confidence to use the technology effectively throughout the year. So understanding the importance to budget and plan around continuous professional development is key. And if we look back over many decades at the adoption of technology in major projects around the world, probably 80% of the time, those projects that fail are not because of the technology, but they're because there wasn't the appropriate training and professional development built to give staff and students the confidence to use it effectively. So we've had our conversation, all the stakeholders around our Venn diagram, and there are more. We can drop parents in there depending on the nature of the technology as well. Will have had a voice and helped us start to shape our digital strategy. And one thing to remember is a digital strategy is never something you're finished with. It should be a living document that you continue to reflect and revise and amend on a regular basis. Then we need to consider, if we've got a huge list of aspirations and ideas, we've got to balance priorities over conveniences. We've got to think of those key things that are important to our school when we start building our priorities. It's not a race to who's got the most ed tech. It's about doing things step by step and making sure we can measure impact. So it's got to be pedagogy focused, aligned with our school's development plan. We've got to be realistic with our capacity. We've got to look at things that can be sustainable and embedded, not a quick short win. And we've always got to be mindful of how do we measure impact. That's how we build confidence to build the next layer of our digital plan, the next layer and so on. It's always focusing on those measures of impact. I would add on impact, we're somewhat focused within the education space that impact is always about teaching and learning outcomes. And that's kind of fine, but in recent years, we've learned that we need to widen that lens. When we think about impact, some of the measures might be social, emotional, mental health, student well-being. It might be about time saving and the impact on staff well-being. It might be bigger picture that if we're thinking really strategically, putting the right tools and technology in place that saves staff time and improves efficiencies has a direct correlation with staff retention. And retention and recruitment can be a really big factor when we're thinking about the long-term planning of our schools. So broadening the lens, not to exclude, but to also add to that singular mindset around children's learning outcomes is really important. Now, I've alluded to it. Confidence is king when it comes to technology. As Labi Sifri would say, it's all about feeling strong with your technology. So what do we mean by that? Well, again, there's a great example here. I often use Sylvia Duckworth's graphics and doodles because I think they're really cool. But recognizing and focusing on those stages of confidence when it comes to teachers and staff in general using technology. And let's just take an example that you arrive in school one morning and you find a cart in your classroom full of brand new Chromebooks and there's been no conversation. Hopefully that won't happen. But step one, you will hand those Chromebooks out to your students. You will start yours at the front of the class and you will probably be in survival mode. I don't know if I'm going to break it. I'm not sure what to do with it. I really think I could use it in the lesson, but I don't know how to. You then start to see, and under some training, you build some confidence that yes, they'll start up in 30 seconds and my students know how to log in. I'm starting to develop confidence and you become mastery as you get that training. You start playing and practicing with the apps. You trial them in lessons. And when things work, you build confidence. And over time, what we're all aspiring to is having impact. And ultimately, by having confidence with the technology, we can start to innovate. Now, those steps don't just magically happen. And all the way through there is time. So as senior leaders in schools, what we're thinking of is not simply handing the Chromebook and expecting staff, in their evenings or weekends to research and YouTube and find out all the ways to use their technology. But we're going to build that professional development in so that we can make sure our staff are empowered to have confidence. In the UK, we have an Ofsted inspection that comes along every few years, which is an external inspection of our schools, and we have similar formats around the world. And one of the best measures or litmus tests of whether you are confident with your technology is if you knew your lesson was going to be inspected in the next hour, would you roll out that cart of technology, or would you go for something on the interactive panel at the front of class? And understanding where you sit with that confidence is really, really key. Again, why spend money on deploying technology if you don't give people the skills and confidence to use it effectively? One thing we've also learned is that fundamentally it's about communication. And for us, we really noticed that during the pandemic, technology was also a key to supporting and facilitating better and more effective communication within our schools. Often staff pre-pandemic would come into school, head to their faculty department, and they'd be in their department all day. Suddenly, with remote working, with utilizing technology, whether you were a Google or a Microsoft-based institution, we would find that we would have Teams channels for staff across a school or across our trust collection of schools. And those silos for the first time were broken out. Now, some of those channels were all about sharing resources and best practice and comms between peers in other schools in the area, but some were actually there for well-being and just general conversation and actually starting to engage and foster better relationships. What we also found was it was an easier channel for leadership to communicate with staff more regularly and effectively about what we were planning to do and how. We also then found, ironically, that it was also a great platform for not just school to student, but actually school to parent and community communication. And as a byproduct of that, we suddenly found that by communicating digitally through different tools, we actually increased far better engagement with our hard to reach families, those families that wouldn't traditionally turn up on our parents' evenings and so on. And we also found for our children with special educational needs, technology allowed us to maintain routine, a consistency on face-to-face discussions, a check-in with our children, and to make sure that they always felt there was a connection. Now, all those things have been really useful to us during the pandemic, but what we've also seen across schools is that some have decided, well, we don't need those now in a post-pandemic era. Others have recognized that these are actually really important tools that we can continue to weave into our offering as a school and maintain better communication on all those different strands that I've talked about. So here's Al, somebody who loves EdTech when used appropriately, and I always put that little caveat on the end. And there's a sentence: EdTech is not the solution. And I need to finish the sentence because that doesn't completely conclude it. But it's important to recognize that EdTech is not the solution. It's the facilitator, the supporter, the empowerer. Technology does not replace great teaching and learning. It simply empowers great teachers to be amazing where used appropriately. So it's really important because sometimes we can get a bit wrapped up in this panacea to all things, or we'll get some new technology in the classroom and magic will happen. Well, no, it won't. But empower teachers to understand the confidence to use the technology, and there's the potential for amazing things to be added to existing teaching and learning. So a vision for a school for a digital world. And we're going to talk about this at a very brief level, and then we're going to move into how do we make it happen. So I would argue a school for a digital world starts with pedagogy and experience, and outcomes come first. That EdTech isn't the daily discussion, but becomes an integral part of the school day. It's just a tool in the toolkit. It's used where appropriate, but it's not forced into each and every setting. There are some amazing lessons happening across our schools every day, and many of them have not a jot of technology in them at all, and that's just fine. It's important in our strategy for a school for a digital world that teachers have confidence to use the tools, and they have the confidence and are empowered to try new tools. And one of the very few positives to come from the pandemic, when I think back to March 2020, and I was working with schools in all sorts of settings, was for the first time for many, they were given the opportunity to take risks. And I don't mean significant risks with our learners. I mean risks of actually going out and trying new technology. They were under pressure to find solutions quickly to try and mitigate the impact of the lockdown for many children, but it gave us a chance to try. Now, I would argue the more you are empowered to take risks with technology, the quicker you will deliver innovation. If you don't try stuff, you'll never find the good stuff. Of course, you also have to accept that in trying new things, some things won't work, and that's fine. We shouldn't be punished for it. We shouldn't be judged for it. We need to empower our teams across our schools to feel confident to try things. We also need to make sure as part of that and our strategy that students are taught and encouraged to be confident digital citizens. We can put technology in place that will help mitigate some of their online risks, but the best addition we can do is teaching our learners about digital citizenship, about how they communicate online, how they share information, and so on. And we make sure that safeguarding is at the heart of our decisions. The final bit, before we come on to some of the details, was also whenever we make decisions about technology, we're also mindful of trying to mitigate the digital divide. And it's a funny one, because in one regard, the first thing we did was we looked for our children that were more vulnerable and didn't have access to connectivity, and we either shared devices or we shared 4G dongles with them. We tried to mitigate that digital divide so that all of our students had equity of access. And as we roll the clock forward, we could be talking now about the opportunities of the metaverse and how we can use VR to stimulate learning. Again, we need to be really mindful that when we're looking at our technology, we want to try and pick solutions that will not extend that divide between the haves and have-nots of our learners, but where possible is something that's equitable and accessible for everybody. Now, very well-known leaders in the education space, Bananarama, for any of you who are fans of 80s music, one of their songs, "It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it." And that's fundamentally what it's about. It's about the confidence of how we use the technology and how we interweave it. So perhaps one good example, it's often used, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the SAMR model. And the SAMR model really has those kind of 4 pillars, as the letters suggest: substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And what that in essence means is we can look where we can switch something that we do in a physical sense to do it in a digital way. So substitution is as simple as replacing a sheet of paper that we're writing on with a Google Doc. Of course, we know that we have a digital document, we could include links. We could perhaps replace an atlas with Google Maps, and suddenly we can augment because we can add quick measuring of distances or pin marking key sites around a map and so on. And again, we can then look at how we can deliver different tasks in a different way. And over the years, we'll have seen schools connecting from around the world and having auto translation across the bottom of the screen to allow our citizens to meet each other. And we'll look at the way that our new remote learning provides us with opportunities. The SAMR model is a good reference point. It's absolutely not a race to you've got to get to redefinition. It's being mindful of when you can do something in a different way. And I would argue the simple bit you want to worry about is, does it add? Is it for a purpose? Are we switching to digital because we can, or because it actually helps and adds value? And for somebody who's a big supporter of EdTech, when it comes to delivery in your schools, less is more, unless it's chocolate. Of course, that's a different overarching rule. So why do I say less is more? Because for many, they felt a pressure. Oh, everybody's adopting digital in their schools. They've got more digital than us, and so somehow they're doing it better. No, actually, the best and most effective way to deliver digital is to do it step by step, adding a couple of key elements that you can embed, build confidence with, measure impact, and then add another layer again. Actually trying to do too much too quickly is increasing your chances of failure and is unreasonable in terms of the expectations you're putting on staff to suddenly build confidence in lots of different technology all at the same time. But let's assume we've done our collaboration, we've got our feedback from staff, we've got some ideas about technology that could really help support our teaching and learning. We're really mindful that we want pedagogy aligned technology, and we're really mindful of we don't want to do too many things at once. So we've got some technology in mind that we're considering. How are we going to choose it? How are we going to make sure we make the right decision in our school? Well, we can start with the concept of evidence. And one of the biggest narratives, which I'm really pleased to see, that has reared its head over the last couple of years, is evidence-informed edtech. And we could translate that to, listen, can we really just believe the shiny brochure and website, or should we look for more evidence to validate that the technology on offer is going to have an impact? As Adele said, you know, sometimes we get focused on rumor has it. Well, rumor is not a good thing, but if it's third-party feedback from peers, then maybe it has its place. And there are different kinds of evidence that we can look for. We can look for the anecdotal evidence, impressions from users' experience who've used it before and felt that it worked well. We can look for descriptive evidence, measures of outcome over time. We can look at white papers and exam summaries of technology where we can see how it's worked for other schools. We can do correlational evidence where we do comparisons. One class has been trialing this technology the last few weeks, another class hasn't. Where do we see the difference? Or depending on the technology, we can look at causal evidence where we can look for accurate measures over effectiveness over time. And often that's linked to things like independent research on how that's had an impact, perhaps on numeracy skills or literacy skills and so on. What I try and do is break that down into a bit of a rubric and a flow chart. What should we think about? So apologies, it's quite a few boxes here. I'm going to try and just focus in on them, and again, these slides I'm sure will be available for you afterwards. So my best advice is split your consideration into two rows. At the top, you'll see we have a solution we're interested in, and we've got a curriculum and a technology stream. So our techie brains and our techie team within our schools should be saying, does this solution we're looking at effectively work within our current and future devices? So will it work on our current infrastructure? But more importantly, is it, where possible, platform agnostic? We don't want to buy a solution that we think will be great that only works on iPads if in the future we might be introducing Chromebooks or Windows devices in our school, or vice versa. Does it work with our current infrastructure? Does it purely a cloud-based solution that means we're going to have to update our bandwidth to our school? Or is it something that requires all the students to have a really strong Wi-Fi connection and we're going to have to update the access points we have in our classroom? Does it agree with our school privacy policy? Well, depending on where you are in the world, there will be considerations about where data is stored in the cloud, who has access to it, where its regional locale is, and others. We want to check those things out before we start spending time evaluating in earnest. And we also might want to think about whether the solution rosters. Rosters is perhaps more of an American term, but in essence, have we got to manually enter all of our student data into this new system, or can we pull it through automatically, whether it's from Google or Microsoft or ClassLink or Clever, whatever the solution, will it automatically update with our student details and keep updated as new students come and go from within our cohort? Let's assume it's a yes for all. Then we'll have the pedagogy questions. Does this new solution align with our current curriculum? Probably quite an important one. Have we done any kind of questionnaire about what we're expecting from this solution? Have we checked that we don't already have a solution that does the same thing? And you'll be shocked how many schools, when they do their review, find they've got a great new solution, but are still renewing year on year for a previous solution that's no longer used because nobody's actually put the hand up to the finance team and said, we're not using this anymore, stop it. And do we have an understanding of the instructional purpose of the tool? Are we clear on what we're trying to achieve with it? Again, sounds a simple kind of question, but putting it into that, we've considered it from a technology perspective, and we've considered at a high level from an expectation, from a pedagogy, teaching and learning perspective. If we get a yes on all those boxes, then we can move to the bottom half of the screen, which is, have we actually taken a look at it? Have a group of teachers actually vetted it? Has the vendor done a presentation to us so we understand what its capabilities are? Have teachers trialed it in the classroom? And again, I would say it's a guarantee in any software that you try in your schools, an evaluation should be key. Just because it looks great at a trade show or online, you still need to make sure it works within your setting and your infrastructure. And as an outcome of that, did teachers actually believe it had a positive impact? It was beneficial for learning as a result of that trial period. And if you've ticked all those boxes, then you can go to the point of, let's make a recommendation that this is something we'd like to purchase. And understanding those steps, and you might have other boxes that you could add within your own setting, but structuring that process of how we're going to validate means you can have lots of stakeholder voices, you can build confidence, it's not your decision alone, and you've taken reasonable steps to make sure you're making a wise investment. One thing I do, and I think many vendors increasingly do, is in technology that we develop, in this case our solution Classroom Cloud, is we have it externally assessed against educational frameworks. Many of you will be aware that the Finnish education system is recognised as being a strong system. They have a framework that allows technology to be evaluated by educators within Finland who score it for its pedagogical approach and alignment against the Finnish standards, about its learning goals, its accessibility, and that's external validation that you can look for a product to ensure that it's fit for purpose. I always like to mention in there, as part of our strands, I think it's really, really important that we continue to be mindful that whatever we do, we are also continuing to have in the back of our minds about keeping and creating a safe learning environment within our schools. And the more we use technology, the more we want to make sure we've got ways of knowing how the technology is being used by our students, whether it's the way that we're monitoring what websites and activities they have resources to being alerted if they're searching for content that may place them at risk of harm, by giving them that ability to report their concerns, making sure that that works across all of our platforms. So, all that considered, we know how to go at the very high level on evaluating and selecting software. We know what we want to achieve. How do we break our digital strategy down so that it can be shared and delivered across your school or district or collaborative? Well, there are different approaches to doing it. The approach that we use across our schools in the UK, and I've seen replicated in many schools, although the titles might shift, is to create pillars within your digital strategy. In essence, different focal points that different staff can lead on, and means you can have a distributed responsibility for your digital strategy. Or as Madness, again, another 80s band, just taking that one step beyond. So we start with step one is how to have a strategy that has a pillar for digital innovating learning, one for developing student digital skills, one for developing teacher skills, one for technology and infrastructure, one for fostering effective communication, and last but not least, one that's focused about everybody's well-being. And those are the key pillars that we focus on as part of our digital strategy within our schools. So when it comes to innovating learning, the first thing we do is we review the current use of technology, ICT, across our schools. We select technology that's relevant to the classes and subjects where we feel we can have impact. We do and undertake a SWOT, a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, a review of which devices are best suited and will have the best impact. So we find that perhaps for our younger learners, we tend to be more tablet centric. Then we move more to Chromebooks, Windows laptops, and certainly for our older learners, when we think of post 16, we tend to be more desktop and laptop centric. So we'll have different devices for different cohorts, but we want to get the maximum flexibility from them. We'll review the supporting apps that we use to innovate learning to make sure that we're thinking about accessibility, whether it's things like immersive readers, about the way that we can give audio feedback as well as written feedback to our students. We think about where we can expand and broaden immersive experiences. One of our schools, we bought an old bus, we converted it into a digital learning journey bus, and our children in our EYFS, early years foundation stage, so 4 and 5-year-old children upwards, use VR headsets to experience trips and experiences, and we use that as the catalyst for creative writing, vocabulary acquisition, getting them engaged and involved in some different technology. We use augmented reality for science experiments and to explore whether it's butterflies in the rainforest or other experiences. All the time around the innovation of learning, at the same time, we're also making sure we have those appropriate measures. Did it work? How do we measure the impact? How do we feedback? And if it didn't work, we learn from it. We don't critique it or hold any one person accountable for it. The next step important one is students' digital skills. How do we start with that? Well, the most important one is that we consistently, on an annual basis and sometimes more, undertake student digital skills surveys. So we get a sense of where they have confidence with technology and where they don't. We often fall into the trap of thinking that our children are digital natives. But digital natives, being brought up from birth with technology, does not mean they have competence and understanding of the apps that we're choosing to use in our schools. So we have an obligation to make sure that for our children, we build their skills and understand where they need support. We build CPD on the core platforms, whether it's the use of Teams or Google Classroom. We interweave digital citizenship, and we look from all aspects of digital citizenship, from that understanding the implications to the way that we model and interact with our peers online. And we try, particularly for our older learners, to focus on some of those key challenges like digital disinhibition, the way that young people and adults, to be fair, may interact differently in a digital world than they might face to face. It also links around a focus on developing skills within our schools. So challenging the validity of information, the authenticity, being able to develop the skills to research and find information themselves. Again, that independence of learning. And we also have that underarch of ensuring accessibility for all. Teachers' digital skills. Well, big shock horror, we do exactly the same. We do a survey with our staff every year to understand where they are with the confidence levels on the core technology we use. We use that to also not just identify those teachers that need more support and CPD, but we also do it to find the staff that are really confident and able with our technology so that we can signpost those as the flag bearers for our technology, the go-to person. If you've got a question with how to use OneNote, then go see Miss Smith or Mr. Jones. They're the people that will happily give you support and extra input. We make sure that our annual CPD calendar is shaped around that feedback, and we have regular CPD on our inset days. We consolidate across our trust, our collaborative of schools, so that we can make sure that any CPD we deliver is also recorded and shared so that all staff across the trust can have access to it as part of our learning library. We have a monthly tech club where we foster and share who those flag bearers are. Think of them a little bit like a quick teach meet. Staff stand up 3 or 5 minutes, top tips that they've discovered or they're doing in their classroom with technology that helps them. Again, just encouraging and fostering the dialogue around what works. Developing more online resources, building up our stream of access and content, reviewing classroom AV, and also the strategy for classroom tech and staff devices. We thought before the pandemic we were making a really wise move to save money by switching our staff from laptops to a desktop computer front of classroom. So if our staff were off and then cover teacher walked into the classroom, there'd always be a device ready to power the interactive panel front of class. And that made lots of sense. And then the pandemic arrived and staff had to work from home. And we suddenly thought, oh, are we relying on them to use their own technology? Because their technology is a desktop computer that's wired into a classroom. Not surprisingly, quite quickly, we moved to all of our staff having their own devices. And actually, it feeds into confidence. If you prepare your resources at home on your laptop and you walk into a classroom with that laptop, you're pretty sure it will work. You know where your resources are and you've already had a chance to check that they work. Walk into a strange classroom with a USB memory stick and there are lots more variables that you want to consider. So those were a kind of a key element. There's also been quite a lot of research that's been undertaken quite recently. This was work done again in Finland, looking from the Education Alliance Finland at some of the factors that increase teacher motivation to use EdTech. And these, I hope, won't come as a shock to you, about having the right resources to use the technology effectively, having time for preparation, competency development and sharing, having those kind of preferences, so giving the flexibility for teacher feedback into how the technology has been interwoven into their lessons, that reflection, getting the feedback from students and colleagues and identifying the impact it's having, and also looking from a broader sense about how we can actually bring technology to have a benefit to our staff. And sometimes it is part of our recruitment and retention, is making sure that we can attract high performing, innovative teachers to our schools by making sure that we have a mandate to provide the right tools to allow them to deliver those experiences as best they can to their students. Technology and infrastructure is a key one, and whenever I talk too much about the technology, for many it's a little bit of a let's just pause and have a quick snooze until we get past the boring bit. But the reality is there's lots to be done here. If you're part of a school district, a collaborative schools, there's huge economies of scale if you can standardize on the key platforms and technology you use. It's not just about money, although if we save money on infrastructure and technology costs, we've got more money for teaching and learning, which is always a good thing. But it's also about the fact that if we're managing consolidated platforms, we can actually do more CPD for the same cost and time. We don't have to duplicate our CPD for different platforms. It's easier to manage things like our data protection policies for all of our applications. Looking at how we, as part of our infrastructure, can support personalized learning pathways, whether it's AI-based tools that we use for students in our secondary provision for their personalized pathways, whether it's the early years and primary assessment tools we use that capture a child's learning journey that we can then share back to parents in real time. All sorts of different ways to look and make sure we're part of that. And alongside that, we also have to have our disaster recovery plan. How do we make sure that our infrastructure is robust, and what happens if there's a problem with it? And effective communication. Again, I touched on that in terms of comms that we've developed. For our trust, we chose to go the Office 365 route. We've developed the use of Teams across the trust. We have channels across Teams that are linked to curriculum specific, but we also have separate channels that are for staff collaboration. We utilize it to promote parental engagement and give them the resources for training so that they've got confidence to support our younger learners with their tools. We've developed our strands and our focus on school to home communication, utilizing more tools, developing our social media presence, and we've also looked at ways that we can deliver more effectively training. Perhaps a good example is we go through the holiday season, and during our holidays, sometimes we deliver revision classes for our students before the exam season. And typically staff would come in from home, students would come in from home during the holidays for revision classes, and maybe half the cohort would attend. Now we make sure that we record those lessons and those revision classes. The teacher doesn't need to come into school. The students can be at home, and as part of that equity, if there are more than one student in the same household, it doesn't matter if they haven't got a device at the time. They can access the recording and content later on when it's available to them. And that allows us to build a library of exemplars and resources that can be used again and again. Mindful of time, we're on the home straight. Everybody's well-being, that last strand, really focused about fostering staff communication, looking at technology to reduce teacher workload, whether it's assessment tracking, the feedback loop, auto grading, looking on remote working, impact versus well-being. For many, remote working meant more preparation time, more actual hours invested, looking at better tools to support our SEND children, more face-to-face support and interaction, easier access to online resources, right the way down to utilizing our digital signage around our schools, not just to tell children what was on the dinner menu for the day, but actually promoting success and stories from around the school, actually highlighting student work and being much more focused, and having a digital wellbeing group. So we have voices from all levels of seniority across our schools that collaborate together to come up with ideas of how technology can support staff and student wellbeing. I've mentioned it, but don't underestimate the power of actually knowing who your champions are for different technology around your schools. Your confidence level trying something new, if you know the other staff who you can go to if you have a problem, is huge. My top tips: get everyone involved as part of your digital strategy. Don't try and do too much too quickly. Plan for lots of CPD, and when you've planned it, plan for a bit more. Build confidence with a few tools. Confidence will inspire people to try, to innovate, to try and use more regularly. Identify ways to measure impact. And again, don't just think teaching and learning outcomes, but think about time, well-being, broader measures. And never forget, communication is the key. Last wrap up. If you're interested in all things EdTech, there's a bright yellow book, My Secret EdTech Diary, I released last year, which covers all things EdTech over the last 20 years, best practice from schools in the last couple of years. You can also check out classroom.cloud if you want to find about cloud-based classroom instructional tech in your schools. And hopefully, with about a minute or two to go, as Warner Brothers would say, that's all, folks. And hopefully that's whetted your appetite for all things digital strategy and EdTech in your schools. Please reach out to me, @Kingsley_edu on Twitter or EdTech Diary on Instagram. I'm always happy to have a chat and talk about all things EdTech with you.
Thank you.
And at that point, I shall flip back to main screen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Al. Thank you for your amazing session. Thank you for elaborating and helping shape a digital vision for schools and showing us steps to build digital strategy. And we have people from all over the world saying hello to you. We have Didi Bell from Louisiana, the United States. We have Ivan Prinsloo from Tasmania. We have Suman from Myanmar. And we have Umaro Minhazi, and we have Lawrence. He says, fantastic, this is so great. Thank you so much. There's so many different tools within technology that learning alongside our students becomes inevitable. You have touched on so many incredible points within technology. And we have Jyoti Gupta. She questions, with the increase in the use of digital platforms, how do we avoid or reduce cyberbullying?
That is a really good question. And thank you for asking, because it's something that we're really mindful of. There are two strategies. I think we can look at technology as one. As I alluded to, the more important strategy starts with the digital citizenship, teaching young people how to interact and behave online, the risks that there are. When it comes to cyberbullying, we've got two different strands. We can use technology in the preventative. So we can use technology in all our schools. In the UK, we have the Keeping Children Safe in Education Act. In America, think of SEPA, but we can use tools that will detect if a child is searching for content that places them at risk or harm, or is using terminology that perhaps might identify as bullying. Probably the most effective way is allowing and providing a facility for children to report a concern. And so there are lots of technology. I'm not using this as an OWL sales pitch. The classroom.cloud product I shared there has exactly that functionality in it that allows a child who is being bullied to perhaps quickly capture evidence, perhaps a Facebook post where someone's being unkind or harmful towards them, and they can pick a trusted member of staff. It may not be their form tutor. It might be a topic that they're embarrassed about and want to pick a different member of staff. So simply giving them a way, whether it's on the school website or a desktop app on their device, that allows them to pick that trusted member of staff and report their concern, share that they feel vulnerable, if appropriate, share evidence, and then make sure that a member of staff picks that up. If we think about concerns, it's all part of our broader safeguarding concern. Depending on the nature of that concern, bullying, or how the child is feeling, that will dictate the severity of whether it's something we need to interact with and address today, or whether it's something that we can monitor and start to support the child with. So there are digital tools that can support that, but actually fundamentally, and again, as a group of educators here, I feel like I'm telling you something that you will already know. The most important thing is children will share if they feel they have a relationship and a trusted relationship with staff.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Al. And we have Sahajada saying greetings from Saudi Arabia. We have MD Bajit saying greetings from Bangladesh. And we have Dr. Pratima questioning, great insight, Kingsley, huge appreciation. How to build capacities for technology uses in teaching and learning processes in the teachers who are primarily digital immigrants. Your views, please.
That's a really good one. I mean, let's be honest, whenever we think about learning anything new, we all start at the beginning with, I've got no confidence, I've no idea how to do it. I can think back to the 80s and my struggles trying to set how to record TV on my VCR. Luckily, things have moved a bit simpler for there. So when we think about staff, and for many, a lack of confidence with digital, the starting point is about understanding why we're using a particular technology, how we're going to use it, and making sure that we have the right CPD. Now, the CPD that often happens because of time allocations in schools is at the start of the academic year. We will have a day where we might have a 1 or 2 hour session talking about a technology. And then largely we're left to figure out the rest ourselves. Actually, what's more effective is regular monthly short sessions and resources. We've now learned, because of the last 2 years, that we can record a 15-minute exemplar. I can sit and talk to myself and record it with some top tips on how to use the basics of Teams, and then share that with all of our staff, and they can access that at a time when it suits them. But as school leaders, we can also try and build in more non-contact time, more inset time for staff to actually be able to use and get confidence with the technology. That's probably the biggest reason why I say less is more, that there's a real risk. Some schools went from little technology to lots of technology very quickly, and it was unrealistic to expect staff to learn and build confidence on all those different platforms. So if we start with the basics, then we can add the building blocks. If we think about Teams, I'm using it as an example and trying to be, Google's just as good for different reasons, and there are other platforms, of course. Many people pre-pandemic thought Teams was just a chat program, full stop. That's all it did. You just used it for chat and messaging. And the technology was already there, but nobody had been given and empowered to really understand the capability and breadth of the solution. So now we make sure that we do short inset, we record it, we have a central library for all of our staff where they can access those resources. And if they're trying something new and they're not feeling confident with it, they now know they can go speak to Anusha or to Al or to somebody else. And they're the people who are really confident with Teams and are happy to share advice and support. If they want advice on OneNote, there's somebody different. If they want advice on a different curriculum app, there'll be somebody different. And that signposting builds confidence that I'm going to give it a try, because I know if I struggle, there's somebody friendly I can go talk to.
Thank you so much, Al. We have 10 minutes and we have so many questions for you. So teacher Nissi Pearl's questions. I am Nissi. I run an online ESL teaching company with 7 other teachers for students in Vietnam and India. We need training, testing, certifications and accreditation so we can pass on the knowledge to Indian teachers and in Vietnam. So we are well-experienced teacher who want to transition from regular school to after-school education. How can we get your support training? We are from India, the USA, Australia, and Vietnam.
Goodness, that's not necessarily my specific area of expertise. Obviously, if you're great teachers running an online provision, which is wonderful because that helps level that place-based divide for learners, they should have access to high-quality education wherever they are. I would always argue in that case that if you want to get the validation and the certification, it's really about dealing with the right curriculum providers, the awarding bodies that will give you that validation that you're providing an appropriate, relevant and current curriculum. So I would reach out to a number of the awarding bodies that provide curriculum content. There are some vendors within the edtech space that provide a full breadth of provision covering many different subjects that often are looking for providers, but won't necessarily certify your accreditation of the quality of your delivery. So look at the awarding bodies and look at the curriculum providers that are specialized, whether it's in math, literacy, English, the humanities. There's lots of STEM-based providers now who can often signpost to you on a national basis of who they work with that are providing the validation of their content. And they're likely to be the awarding bodies and the people that can validate your delivery.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Al. And we do have another question from Shuhan Mong Eng. She asked, what kind of LMS do you recommend to use for creating self-paced learning courses?
Well, I have to make a confession, which is one thing I always try and do, is be platform and vendor agnostic. I always try and avoid sort of signposting to one or other in presentations, because I think the best way is to embrace all. So take this the right way, but message me afterwards and I'll happily share you some links, but I try not to be promoting one vendor over another in a kind of a platform. There are some great learning management systems out there. And from that point of view, I say I'm more than happy to share offline some details.
You may connect with Al on educationinfluence.com as well, everybody. And I do have another question for you, Al, and it's from me. The tech giants are manufacturing new gadgets, making the older gadgets incompatible and unscalable. So how would you suggest to solve this issue?
You know, that's a really good question, because it's in the interest of tech manufacturers to either have you refresh your hardware regularly so they can make more money, or change the way that your technology is delivered. You won't be surprised that the people who were most keen to promote the move to the cloud were the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Google of this world. And you won't be surprised to see that their revenues have grown hugely, because rather than paying one time for your software, you now pay for it on an annual subscription.
Yeah.
And you therefore, over the time, pay far more money. How do you mitigate against that? Well, the first thing is that bit I talked about platforms being device agnostic. If you look for technology that provides support for Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, sometimes they're browser based and therefore the platform isn't the fundamental link, then you don't get yourself tied into one. Actually, the bigger one, I talk about it as being sticky software, sticky systems, and it might be your student information system, your learning management system. What you need to be mindful of is if you trial and decide to move to product X as your new platform for all your student data and tracking, sometimes they're developed intentionally to be sticky, which means that it's really hard for you in a year's time or 2 years' time to move to a new, better solution, because you can't get your data out easily and move it with you. And that data of your students' activity is key to you. So before you select a product, make sure you're clear not only on how easily you can get your student information into the system, but also be mindful of how easy it is to get your data out of the system. That means, as we know full well, every year there will be new solutions available. Some will be better, some will be worse, but you control the power as the school, because you can choose to move to a better solution or a more cost-effective solution, and you're not being held back by the limitations of the technology.
Thank you, Al. We have 5 minutes left, and Dr. Patima questions, what percentage of technology integration is generally recommended in hybrid teaching and learning at schools and higher education levels?
Now, I have to say on that one, my simple answer is it depends on the cohort. We often talk, when we first went to the beginning of the pandemic, there were many international schools that flipped to modeling the virtual world, the exact replica of the teaching day. So they had 5 one-hour online sessions. Well, that depends on your cohort. I mean, I personally wouldn't do particularly well if I had 5 hours on Zoom every day being taught information, but we have to be mindful of our cohort. So thinking of our alternative provision students, 15, 20 minutes of focal time is quite important. So one thing I would encourage is that schools do not have a standard that says this is what you must deliver, but are mindful of what you're teaching, because there will be opportunities for just as much asynchronous as synchronous teaching and learning that goes on, but also your student cohort. Your SEND children will struggle with long periods of attention span and will be much better off with the way that you might in the classroom chunk a lesson or chunk information that you're sharing. So I'm not sure there's a percentage that is the right or the wrong. I would always argue that that decision should be taken by the expert in the room, the teacher, who knows their students, knows how they behave, how long they can keep their focus when they've got disengaged learners, and trust their experience as to how best to keep that learning journey continuing.
Thank you so much, Al. And we do have another question from MD Baijit Khan from Bangladesh. And I think he and I agree with the same question, which I'm going to ask you. The question is, in order to develop digital skills, learners need internet, compatible gadgets and digital skills. In this context, how can we address the problems of the other side of the digital divide? So you have 3 minutes, Al.
So when we think of the digital divide, obviously cost and accessibility to technology, the two areas are technology and connectivity. I'm an ambassador for the Digital Poverty Alliance. And one thing I think is, as developers, the EdTech community, we have an obligation to develop technology that is accessible on as many different devices and with as minimum level of system requirements. So being able to utilize those older tablets that the manufacturer wants you to replace with a new version, but ensuring your technology supports it. Making sure that where appropriate, if you've got content that, although it's digital, there's an option for you to offline it for children, to send to children that don't have access to the same resources. Some now, I would always say, is developed to the lowest common denominator. If you've got an app for a tablet, make sure it works on a smartphone. That's more likely to be available. that concept of offlining, so being able to record content so that if you've got a household with 3 children and only 1 device, they can access it at different times. Low data bandwidth of technology. The biggest solution to all of this, which I'm afraid we can't fix in this forum, is that governments around the world need to recognize that digital connectivity is just as important in today's generation as water and electricity. And every household and every child should have access to connectivity to ensure they get fair access to education.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Al. Thank you for your lovely presentation. And if you would like to connect with Al, please visit educationinfluence.com.